We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
He's a retired Massachusetts cop. He spent 3 decades during a time where mobsters ran without fear in the streets of Boston. He's here to talk about investigating James Whitey Bulger, Stephen the Rifleman Flemmi, his book, podcast, and much more. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Today radio show. I'm your host. My name's John J. Wiley. In addition to being a radio broadcaster, I'm a retired police sergeant. For the latest news articles and much more, check out our website, letradioshow.com. In the Law Enforcement Today show, we'll be joined by special guests. We'll be talking about their experiences and issues affecting law enforcement officers, first responders, their families, their community, and victims of horrendous crimes. Be sure to like us on Facebook. Our page is Law Enforcement Today Radio Show. Check out the daily articles on our website, letradioshow.com. And while you're there, download our free app. The Law Enforcement Today show is brought to you by 4patriots.com. That's the number 4patriots.com. They offer the world's best survival food, the Patriot Power Generator 2000X and more. And right now, you can go to 4patriots.com and use code LET to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in the store. You'll also get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order. Plus, free shipping on orders over $97. And a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support our veterans and their families. Just go to 4patriots.com. That's the number 4patriots.com. Use code LET to get 10% off. Content is from Massachusetts. We have retired Massachusetts State Trooper Joe Saccardo. Joe worked organized crime for many years in the Boston area, chased down all the bad guys we know. He also has a book called Capable, and he has a podcast by the same name. Joe, number one, thanks for your service. Number two, thank you for being a guest on the Law Enforcement Today show. Very much appreciated.
You're more than welcome, sir.
I got to tell you, the first thing I think of is Whitey Bulger. I also think of this old television show a long time ago. I think they set it in Providence, Rhode Island, but it was based loosely off the Winter Hill Gang and the politicians called Brotherhood. And they didn't portray the Massachusetts State Police in a very favorable light. Do you know that series I'm talking about?
No, I don't, but I know why they didn't, probably because we were chasing them all over the area. That's why. we were on them.
It was never ending, and I can't wait to have some of the conversations, because this is a topic we don't get to talk about very much. And I got to say this. We'll talk about your career and what it's like chasing him down. But I got to ask you, man to man, police aside, I'm of Irish descent. My grandparents immigrated from County Cavan, Ireland. I have a strong dislike for James Whitey Bulger and for corrupt Irishmen. I really can't stomach them. Did you find that to be a personal issue for you as well?
I absolutely did. I'm half Irish and half Italian, and I always knew that people call me behind my back, never to my and when I got into law enforcement, I saw that these Italian mobsters were spoiling the great reputation of both Italian and Irish, of great people from the Boston area. That I know that we, and the Italians in particular, were being stereotyped because of maybe a possible connection to the mafia.
Right. Well, here's the thing. And Hollywood loves to portray a certain type of stereotype. When it comes to police, look, I am the stereotypical Irish Catholic, knuckle-dragging Neanderthal cop. Look, I tell people all the time, I could be 85 years old in the old folks' home and someone goes, shh, there's 5-0. It's part of my thing. And I'm not embarrassed about any of that. But Hollywood, what they portray is not the truth.
I don't like Hollywood. That's the least strong word I can use. I've seen them. I've seen celebrities when they're in action, and I will give this to several people from the Boston area, Affleck and Damon and the Wahlbergs. They seem to be handling themselves well, and they after many years of being involved in Hollywood, they seem to be ripping away and doing a lot more of movie production in the Boston area. And that's and talking about a stone cold Irish knuckle dragon. Several people have asked me that thought the book was well written, did I have a ghostwriter? And I said no. It's kind of an insult and a compliment all in the same sentence. And I told him, I said, go back to the book and you'll see the acknowledgments. And what I acknowledge is there was a divine intervention in my writing. I'm not an author. I'm not a writer. I am now, but it took a lot of people helping me out along the way and getting information that I would not normally have been able to get under the circumstances. So it's I'm with you on that aspect of things when it comes to life.
Yeah, they really portray the Italians not well. And they also portray, Joe, I love a lot of those old movies. Goodfellas, Godfather,
oh, yeah.
I love that stuff. But I know it's fake. And I know it doesn't represent the vast majority of people.
No,
you got exposed to this element even before you got into police work, didn't you?
Yeah, I knew Steve Flemmi, who was what I thought a low-level bookie in crime in Boston, and I knew his what would become his paramour, the mother of his 3 children, and to this day we actually communicate with each other as he sits in the prison in New York. I believe it's in New York, and it's for like cooperating witnesses. And there's more to that story that I can't talk about right now because I'm looking to get more information out of him, but I'm not being allowed to by the Boston office of the U.S. Attorney. Yeah,
well, that really casts big aspersions on one of the stereotypes. The stereotypes is if someone's a mobster, they don't talk to police and they don't like police. And it seems to be in fashion nowadays to say, I don't like the cops. I tell people all the time, look, I'm a retired police sergeant. You like cops, that's fine, but you're not going to like me either.
Yeah, exactly. I've sort of been witness to some of that, but not. I've been out 28 years, retired. I have a standing joke that the State Retirement Board has a poster up there. Joe Saccardo wanted dead or alive, preferably dead, because of the pension aspect that I've been able to have for 28 years, and so far so good. God's kept me alive, and I know why, but we won't get into that. But that's. I didn't really experience what's going on in policing today against cops, particularly in the inner cities. And not to get into politics, but you don't have to, read between the lines. They're led by folks that just in Chicago, they just elected a mayor that is down on cops already.
It's something we don't talk about, but it's a very hidden in view secret, and it's not so secret. Who's behind all this? I got to say this: I retired in '92. Now, granted, I got hurt and I was retired young. I was 33 in active violence, so I think I got you beat as far as collecting a retirement.
Very few of us.
That's true.
Yeah, I went out in '95.
Yeah, and we used to say all the time, and I'm sure you encountered this. When you're a young cop, you always get that mouthy person who says, I pay your salary.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
I turn around and say, they also pay for my retirement, and I got to say thank you very much.
I used to say it because I had a friend tell me that. And I said, you don't make enough to pay for my retirement.
We used to do all, and I was so poor, Joe, I would flip them a nickel and say, here's your contribution to my wages. And now we're even.
I like that. That's good. That's good, John.
So you got exposed to the mobsters, and I'm air quoting mobsters because that's a term that I think Hollywood invented. But I got to say this. I look at James Whitey Bulger. I look at Steve Flemmi, and I don't know them personally. I never met them. They've never done anything to me. However, I don't hold them in high esteem. I really don't. I think from what I met with most so-called killers, and I'm air quoting, they were cowards behind a gun.
Well, yeah, Jimmy Bulger was not a big guy. Neither was Steve. They knew once they were rising in the ranks of organized crime, not the mafia, because neither one of them were ever in the mafia. Bulger couldn't get in because he was Irish. Jimmy Martorano and his brother John could not be because their mother was Irish. They were not going to get inducted. Steve Flemmi said he never wanted to get into it, but I think his mother may not have been fully Italian also. But James Bulger, Jimmy, is not a big guy, and he hid behind the gun, and he hid behind other guys. I don't think this is in retrospect, if he didn't have a gun, he wouldn't have been as tough as he portrayed himself to be.
And if he didn't have a lot of other backup around, he certainly wouldn't. We were talking with Joe Saccardo, retired Massachusetts State Trooper. He investigated the mobsters that ruled Boston. He wrote a book called Capable. He's got a podcast called Capable. When we return to the Law Enforcement Today show, we're going to talk about investigating organized crime and more. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Authorities are now checking our grid for vulnerabilities. They've identified 9 key substations. If these substations are attacked, power could be knocked out from coast to coast for up to 18 months. Imagine a blackout lasting not days, but weeks or months. Your life would be frozen in time right at the moment the power fails. Lights all over the country would go out, throwing people into total darkness. That's why having your own solar power is more important than ever. With the new Patriot Power Generator 2000X, you get a solar generator that doesn't install into your house because it's portable. You can take it with you, even use it inside. But it's powerful enough for your phones, medical devices, or even your fridge. And right now, you can go to 4patriots.com and use code LET to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in a store, including the Patriot Power Generator. You also get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order. Plus, free shipping on orders over $97, and a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support our veterans and their families. Just go to 4patriots.com. That's the number 4patriots.com, and use code LET to get 10% off. That's 4patriots.com. Use code LET to get yours today. Connecting with Joe Saccardo on the Law Enforcement Today show. Joe is retired Massachusetts State Trooper. He worked for years investigating organized crime in the streets of Boston. Folks like James Whitey Bulger, also Stephen, Rifleman, Flemmi. His book is called Capable. He also has a podcast called Capable. Joe, again, thanks for all you did. I understand that you knew Steve, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, that you knew Steve Flemmi before you were even policing. Is that correct?
Yeah, I had an indirect invitation with him. I met him in the year of 65, 66, if I recall, at a wedding or a wake, and I think it was a wake. But what transpired thereafter in 1967, I was preparing to get on the state police, and I got a call that would I please take Marion, his common-law wife, to the hospital to have a baby. And I did, and I went to the wrong hospital. I got a $15 ticket. I was upset about the whole thing, and I come home, and I told my wife, who told her girlfriend, who was the sister of Marion. They were very close friends out in the Ponset section of Dorchester. And Dorchester is a very, very close community in the city of Boston. That's how Boston is, too. Very homogeneous. In any event, the word got back to Steve that, I was kind of upset, and I got the ticket. And so he wanted to get us, nobody probably knows what this is today, bassinet, because my wife was pregnant with my second child, Joe. And I didn't want it, and because several weeks later, we went into the State Police Academy in July 5th, 1967. Well, that year, Steve had killed 3 people in 1967. Here I am, not knowing much about law enforcement, that he was like a low-level bookie, maybe a loan sharker, or all-around thug. And 2 of the people that he killed are still missing to this day. They were buried elsewhere, and he did kill this guy in December 67, and he did go got an indictment for it, which he beat. And he beat it because of this corrupt FBI agent named Paul. When I say beat, he took off after he got indicted, him and Frankie, who was a co-defendant in the case. And 5 years later, he came back under the auspices of Paul, and they dismissed the charges against Flemmi and and it went nowhere in the relationship to this guy being shot and killed, one of the Bennett brothers in '67 December, and also this other. They attempted to kill a lawyer by the name John Fitzgerald. They bombed his car, but he survived. So that was the beginning of him being Steve, top echelon informant with the FBI, which I think is the most ridiculous program I believe is still out there. But through the years, we would cross paths at these social, functions. Again, a wedding, which I write about in the book. And I don't want to get into too much about it. Nobody will buy the book, but it was an interesting meeting that I had with him in the 90s.
I agree, yeah.
Relating to an investigation that I was doing. I was in internal affairs, and it had to do with him.
I got to ask you this. Did you have any idea what kind of guy Steve Flemmi was, what kind of crimes he did when you helped him and his soon-to-be wife out?
No, I didn't. I didn't realize until I went on the state police and I started doing investigations with organized crime. I was on the road for a couple of 3, 4, 5 years, and then as the 73, 74, 75, I get into the every trooper has to do some road time, and the best is to get about 4 or 5 years on the road, and then see if you can go someplace and do investigations, which I basically did, and that's when I started learning about them. And them being James Bulger and Flemmi and all the cohorts that they had around them. And then I did a wiretap with another trooper, John, who I talk about in the book, who got framed by the FBI. And that's another story. And in any event, we found out, we being the state police through informants, that the local bookmakers who, they're independent, were starting to pay what they called rent. And a clinical word for that is they were paying extortion to Flemmi and Bulger and the Angiulos, which was the titular head of the mafia in Boston, the Angiulo brothers. And we did a wiretap, and that's when I was introduced to John Martirano, because we got him on a good call. And I saw him in court, and he was the epitome of a wise guy. I said, this guy's the real deal. And at that time, he had killed many people. That was 1976. And it's funny, I had to go to the Plymouth House of Correction where he was being held, and to interview a couple of fellas. And I met a few other bookies who worked for Martirano, and I said, hey, how's it going? And we could talk to, I put in the book, I didn't meet a book I didn't like, except one that I put in the book. In any event, they said, he doesn't even talk to us. And I said, you're kidding me? And he said, no. He said, he won't even talk to these two guys, because one of the guys, Jimmy Tumulty, received a phone call at his house sent by John Martirano. We were on his phone, the wiretap, and that's how we got John Martirano. He served 3 to 6 low-level sentence in the House of Correction.
Did you set out to do this kind of work, or did it kind of fall in your lap?
I love the road, and don't get me wrong, you learn on the road. But I had a friend that said, well, listen, come on. He was doing that type of work. And he said, why don't you come on in with us? And I said, okay. And I was able to go in and work with these guys. And as the years went on, I was taking promotional exams. But every time I got promoted, I went back to the road, the Norwell barracks, which I didn't mind, because that was the main job, and I loved doing that. Then I'd go back into investigations, OC. So I'd say probably almost half of my career, maybe a little bit more, was investigating, gaming, loan sharks, organized crime, and then it flourished to a larger unit years later, intelligence. When I went up to captain, and I was in internal affairs, and they moved. They really got more sophisticated than it was during my day. But we did a lot of wiretaps. We did taps. I did 4 or 5 taps with the FBI, and we were very successful.
There was an FBI agent, if my memory's correct, that wound up getting jammed up and going to prison over his handling of Whitey Bulger and all them, correct?
Yeah, more or less, Steve Flemmi. That was Paul Rico. Him and another agent named Dennis Condon were early, how can I say it, activists in the community in Boston, going after folks to make them informants. And he did, in fact, do that with Stevie Flemmi and his brother Jimmy. And they were in this top echelon informant program starting way back in the 60s. And then they Jimmy Bulger matriculated into it in the 70s, and his handler was John Conley, who unfortunately was corrupted by these two gentlemen, Flemmi and Bulger. And as
you
it
use
turns
that
out,
term gentleman loosely like I do.
Yes, and
sometimes it's the only appropriate thing to say, because I'm not, with FCC rules, I'm not allowed to use a language I prefer.
Yeah, well, that's why I do podcasts. It's great.
Yeah, you have a little bit more freedom. One of the things that we're going to talk about is the interesting part, I feel, and I would love to hear your point of view on this when you return, is how these organized crime groups try to corrupt police officers and get them on their payroll. This is Law Enforcement Today Show. We're talking with Joe Saccardo, retired Massachusetts State Trooper, talking about investigating organized crime in Boston like James Whitey Bulger, Stephen and Rifleman Flemmi. His book is called Capable, and his podcast is called Capable as well. This is Law Enforcement Today Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Be sure to check out our great podcast on jefepods.com. That's spelled Jefe pods.com. You'll find an ever-growing selection of shows, some of which are hosted by your favorite radio personalities, from popular English language shows to the hard-to-find Spanish language shows. Check out the newest episodes of Taylor's Table, the Haunting or Not podcast, and more. They can all be found at jefepods.com. That's Jefepods.com, and be sure to tell a friend or two or three.
I am Meg Marie O'Rourke from Harmony with Food. Do you ever wonder what foods you should or should not be consuming based on your own unique needs? At Harmony with Food, we are now able to determine exactly what foods we should or should not be consuming through advanced testing. Test, don't guess is the motto at Harmony with Food's BioUnique Boutique program. It has never been easier than now to determine what food, drinks, and supplements you need for your individualized needs. Head over to harmonywithfood.com and click on the testing tab.
This is the Law Enforcement Today Show. We're turning our conversation with Joe Saccardo. Interesting guy. Retired from the Massachusetts State Police a long time ago. He's been pensioning for a very, very long time. He investigated organized crime in the streets of Boston. People like James Whitey Bulger, Stephen and Rifleman Flemmi. And he wrote a book called Capable, which is doing very well. And he has a podcast called Capable as well. Before we went to break, and earlier in the interview, Joe, you talked about Steve Flemmi, when you took his wife-to-be to the hospital to deliver their baby, you got a ticket, and understandably you're a little upset, and they try to make things right, and he offered you a new bassinet for your baby, and you turned it down. The first thing, and that, Mike, alarm bells started going off my head, because day one in the academy, they started preaching about your integrity, and how these criminals of every ilk would try to get you to accept the slightest thing so they could get you under their thumb. Was that why you didn't take the bassinet?
Well, yeah, at the time I knew somewhat of his criminality, being Steve Flemmi, and I said, I don't want anything to do with this in preparation for the State Police Academy. And I passed on that issue, and I'm glad I did. And the other thing I'm glad I never did, I was never trying in the later years to make him an informant of mine. I'll tell you one reason why. I didn't have too many informants, because I didn't like them.
No.
I had, in the book, I threw an informant out when I was in charge of the AG's office, because the FBI told me he was dancing with the dirty people down and dirty doing coke, and I threw him out of the office. That's how much I didn't like him. He was doing not that great a work as an informant for us, but in any event, so through the years with Steve and his brother was worse than him. He was Jimmy. He was a killer, and Steve admitted to about 10 or 11 murders himself. And the sad part too is, and I profile 6 women in the book that were killed by organized crime. 3 of them are solved, and 3 are not. 2 of them were the 2 Debbies, I call them. One was Debbie Hussey, who was Steve's half stepdaughter, and he killed her for nefarious reasons. And he had a girlfriend also named Debbie Davis, and he killed her because she knew too much about him, being in conjunction with John Conley as an informant. And then there was a couple of other people that John Martorano was admitted to killing a gal, Elizabeth Dixon, the 19-year-old girl, and he was, in my opinion, the two other murders that he was indirectly involved with, and I profile him in the book. And as I say, that's a 50%, less than a 50% succession rate on solving these murders. And most of them occurred in Boston and Suffolk County. But to go on in relationship to these people and how, you've got to watch out as a police officer. I testified in Marion Hussey's wrongful death lawsuit against the FBI, the federal government, because of Steve Flemmi, he killed her, and the FBI was protecting he and Jimmy Bulger. And 3 assistant U.S. attorneys who were fighting the lawsuit asked me about who did I trust during the days that I was trying to find Debbie Hussey, because Marion asked me to find her. And, of course, I couldn't. I didn't because she was already dead. And they said, well, who do you trust? And I told them I didn't trust anybody because I knew who he was, and I didn't want to expose Marion in the sense that she didn't want anybody to know. And I said, they said, who do you trust? And I said, I don't trust anybody from the FBI on down. Now, I had been retired at that point, so I was correct on that one, and because Steve and Jimmy and others worked with the FBI,
right.
And you had two. And I want to just stop 1 second. I work with a lot of good agents for the FBI.
Oh yeah, don't get me. I agree 100%.
Yes, and great guys. And a couple of them are friends of mine to this day, retirees also. And one of them basically challenged me on one issue in the book and emailed, and we emailed back and forth. And I expected to be challenged at some issues, particularly with the FBI, but we're friends. But there were some John Conley, I met him and knew him, and he was I thought he was a pretty reputable guy, but evidently him and this other agent, John Morris. And don't get me wrong, I profiled Dick Snyderhan in the state police, who was our corrupt guy, and we had a few others along the line during that period. Coincidentally enough, my career spanned all those years, 67 to 95, that all this was going on in the city of Boston. And I'm a city kid, and I recognized, at some point what was going on, because all these guys were city kids, the bad guys. Mm-hmm. And nothing against troopers that come from Western Massachusetts who don't have an idea of what's going on in the city of Boston. You have to be a city kid. And I found out the best detectives in Boston and otherwise were guys that came from the city.
So you had experience with these mobbed up guys since you were a kid?
Yeah, I knew who guys were in the neighborhood and who to stay away from. And I'm just laughing here. My father would come home from work and he'd play the numbers. They used to call it the numbers.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'd bring the numbers up to the bookie up in the bar, Coley, and that was the name of the bar. And Sandy was the bookie. And I got a good anecdotal story about Sandy. He passed away some years ago, and I didn't realize he was in AA. And his last death wish, he drank a bottle of scotch. This was Sandy the bookmaker, a good guy.
So many of the history of this, like Baltimore, the politicians in particular, stems from the numbers and the bookies. And maybe it was a different time. Maybe I'm looking back nostalgically, and some of this before my time as well. But you definitely felt the influence of these people. They were not violent. There seems to be a big difference between the Boston mob and the Baltimore crime syndicates when it came to violence at the same time period.
Yeah, well, the only guy that was violent was John Martorano. He admitted to 20 murders, and most of them were to cover up for somebody else that was a witness to a murder, one of his buddies. And he indiscriminately would kill, and he killed the wrong people, misidentified them. And, he only turned federal evidence against Steve and Jim Bulger because they were all in the House of Corrections together after they got arrested in 95. Bulger was on the lam, Flemmi was there, and Martorano. And then he found out through a court proceedings, he being John Martorano, that Flemmi and Bulger were top echelon informers for the FBI. So as I write, John Martorano is not a stupid person. He ran and he won the immunity race. He got his lawyer to talk to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and he fessed up. And I have a copy of his debriefings, and half of it I don't believe in the sense. I'll give you one example. He says he goes to a murder to kill some people. And he did. He killed 3 people in 1968 in January. A young girl that I just mentioned, Elizabeth Dixon, and this kid, Dougie Barrett, and this guy, Uncle Smitty, who was driving the car. He put one in Smitty's temple, in the right temple, and then the left temple of the girls sitting in the front seat, and Dougie Barry sitting next to him in the back seat. He hit him with the right temple. The bullet went through his head and out the glass window. And I wanted to corroborate that from his debriefing with the Boston police. Only one issue, that the ignition keys were taken, and they were, according to the Boston police report. But what I'm getting at is that, these murders were just, there's more to that than I want to say right now.
And quite often they did one of two things. They either downplay their role, it was an accident, I didn't mean to kill him, or they over-dramatize and glorify their actions. I did this, and this. Big braggarts.
Well, that's why I hate memorializing these guys. I have to tell the story, and I had to tell the story. But John Martorano, one of our local TV radio station guys, he wrote a book called The Hitman, and it more or less memorialized John Martorano. Well, I went into the depths of his debriefings because that writer did not have a copy of John Martorano's debriefings, from what I can see. And the guy's a good writer. He's written 2 or 3 books about organized crime in Boston, but he didn't have what I was able to get. And I put in the book where I got it. I got it at the Boston University UGA Library, which I'm a graduate of, so I have access to the library. And either way, I got the stuff.
I'm so glad you did. I agree with you. I don't like giving them any limelight whatsoever. We're talking with Joe Saccardo. There's so much more to talk about. Boston, organized crime, mobsters, his book, podcast, and more. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Have I got a deal for you? No, I'm not trying to sell you a bridge or swampland. Enter contests for your chance to win great prizes by subscribing to the Law Enforcement Today radio show email newsletter. All subscribers are automatically entered in all future contests. Sign up at letradioshow.com. Scroll down to the sign up area. That's letradioshow.com.
Are you wondering where you can find more great podcasts? Head to letradioshow.com, click Be Heard, and discover other fantastic podcasts like this one. Also available on our free app, all at letradioshow.com.
This is the Law Enforcement Today show. I'm John J. Wiley, returning our conversation with Joe Saccardo. Joe is a retired Massachusetts state trooper. Thanks for your service. He investigated organized crime, mobsters in Boston, James Whitey Bulger, Stephen and Rifleman Flemmi, and more. And he wrote a book called Capable. He also has a podcast, the same name, Capable. One of the things, and I think you and I both agree on, I know you, 2 things you and I agree on. Number one, I don't like informants. I had past episodes. I didn't like working with them. We had so many steps we took because they were all shady. They're all manipulative. Very few were doing it for the right reason. We'd have to strip them down naked for controlled buys beforehand, you name it. And then afterwards. So I see the depictions on Hollywood of how cops just let informants go run wild. And I know I didn't do that. I suspect you didn't do that. We've even had guests on the show. Remember Dirty John? He was an informant for a guy named Chris Berg. Check out the podcast, Law Enforcement Today, and find it for free. So that was one thing you and I agree on. I didn't like informants. Number 2, I don't want to glorify bad guys at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't care about their manifestos. I don't care about their reasons. I don't care about any of that stuff.
Yeah, we had our bad guys in law enforcement here during that period. I bring them to the fore a little more than some others may have done. So, it wasn't easy for me to do. I knew it'd be challenged with some issues, and I did. But I wrote the book because I started just joined this trooper name, which got framed by the FBI. Of course, I didn't know it at the time. So I went to the case files at the Federal Archives in Waltham, and I went through his trial transcripts, and I come across a couple of things, and I couldn't believe it, that had never been reported or known about. I testified at his trial for corrupt 5 counts, and he got found not guilty on 4, and the 5th they negotiated away and told him if he retires, then they won't bring up a retrial on that 5th count. And that's what got me interested. I said, son of a so this is they lied about things. They didn't report things that in the trial of Naimovich, and they eventually framed him. So I started reading other things. I seeing these names and and nobody seemed to be reporting on them. And I took an interest in them, especially the 6 women that got killed that I profile in the book. And I went to the Boston Police unsolved homicide. They were very good to me in other areas. But that was the interest at the time, because I just didn't see things the way I saw them. How's that?
Yeah.
During those 28, 30 years of law enforcement, I said, this is not the way it was. And, as you get older and you're in the job, you find out things that you didn't know. And I was sort of getting upset about what was being not reported and lies and so forth. Don't get me wrong, I'm a human being too. Nobody's perfect, at least of all me. But in any event, that's what really, and plus the women that got murdered. I only could put 6 in there. There's several others that nobody's ever written about, and what their family, the trauma that their families have gone through. And as I say, there's of the 3 that I wrote about, they're still unsolved. And that's basically, I can get emotional about it, but I don't want to.
I hear you. There's things, even to this day, Joe, that I tell people, I've deliberately forgotten a lot of names because I don't want them renting any space in my head, but there's still things that come to my mind when I least want them and we're not invited. And it's and here's one of the things I got to ask you this because, and again, you and I both have the same disdain for Hollywood. And when I say Hollywood, that includes the news media, social media, books as well. They act like police don't want to solve murders if someone comes from an at-risk lifestyle, and we're not bothered by it. How false is that?
That we don't want to investigate people.
Right. She was a streetwalker. We washed our hands of that one, for example.
Well, John, I hate to disagree. I find that it was possibly going on in Boston to a greater extent. That John Martorano had a great quote that I did not put in the book because the person that gave it to me, I thought that he may not stand up to it if he was scrutinized. So the point is that I started researching black females that were murdered in the 60s based on the comment that was given to me with regards to John Martorano. He was a pimp, all right? At 23 years old, he was arrested in bed and out of clothing with a prostitute. And then he had Boston police reports that I went over and copied and found that he was getting money from certain women. He married a prostitute. So what I'm getting at is that, to a certain extent, I disagree with that I would love to do further research, but I just don't have the time. I started a second book, and I don't have a lot of time now to do it, that these people were, even to the extent that I looked at the Boston Strangler murders. Those women were all killed in John Martorano's sphere of geographical influence in the South End section of Boston. A lot of them were on the periphery of the South End, and that's where John Martorano and his brother and a few others spent many of the years because they owned a place, Basin Street South, and another place in that area back in the 60s and 70s. John Martorano's father owned an after-hours place in the notorious combat zone in Boston over a place called the Intermission Lounge, and that's where they found the body of Margaret Sylvester. Who was killed by, in my opinion, one of the somebody other than people would think.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
How did you get the idea to start writing a book, and what was the process for writing the book capable?
Well, people started giving me things. I don't know if they knew that I was interested in it, that I was doing research, and I got some good material that I had said earlier that I would not normally have been able to get a hold of. But I had been out of the job, so I started doing this around 2010, somewhere around there. Part-time, nothing was full-time, and just got deeper and deeper, and I just sit down, start writing and processing stuff that I had received, and then I get more stuff, and I processed that and then wrote it down, and I just kept going, and I know I've been accused nicely that the people are reading the book twice because there's so much information in it, and I guess that wasn't necessarily my purpose, but I just had to tell everything that I found out, and I tell people the same thing all the time. I said, for the stuff that I put in that book, I got 99% of it. I got a piece of paper for. The other is anonymous sources.
Right.
So, well, I don't know if that answers your question.
A lot of our investigations are based off that. You needed more than that to take them to court, but that's how we got the ball rolling. What was your goal in writing the book? Was there any to help you feel better? Look, when I retired, my job's not to put cuffs on bad guys anymore.
Yeah. All right. So my goal, I'm going to be honest with this. I used to accuse John Martirano of making a deal with the devil. It's the other way around. The devil made a deal with him. And that was the United States Attorney's Office in Boston and Injustice down in Washington. If I was Martirano, I would have made the same deal. He came forward with his attorney. He had a great attorney, Frank Demento, and he got a fantastic deal. He only spent 3 years minimum in prison. He got arrested in 95 and 97, 98. He started to talk. And that, I said to myself, that is the problem. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston gave him a good... And unfortunately, there were troopers that I worked with, and great guys, that debriefed him, and they heard his story, and a DEA agent, another good guy. But they are the subservient to the assistant U.S. attorneys that they work for. In other words, I work for the assistant U.S. I was trying to move on a guy years ago that I got him on a wiretap, and the U.S. attorney didn't want to go.
Right.
This guy's a wise guy. He's a made guy, as they say. He didn't want to do it.
That's. I'm not surprised. What's the old saying that, and I think it's Japanese, always say, a fish rots him head down. People tend to think it's the street cops is the problem, and it's not. It's usually City Hall. When I say City Hall, that means federal and state and city governments as well, and it's the branches you would least expect that are the dirtiest. We're talking with Joe Saccardo. Where can people get your book, and then where can they consume your podcast?
You can get the book at mascotbooks.com, MASCOT books.com. Go to the bookstore, and they can go on the podcast platforms. We're a little, one of my partners has some ill health, so we're a little behind, but there's about 2 or 3 years worth of pods, and we get into more than the book. And that's why I started it. I wanted to push the book. Who am I? I'm just a guy that just started writing a book, and now it's published. And the Boston Globe is going to come to me and do a review, believe me, because I take them to task in the book also.
Good for you. We're going to wrap things up. Joe, I want to thank you for your service, number one. Right. Number two, really thank you for sharing your story on the Law Enforcement Today show. Very much appreciated.
You're welcome, sir. Thank you for having me.
I'd like to thank our guests so much for coming on the Law Enforcement Today radio show. The Law Enforcement Today radio show is a nationally syndicated radio show broadcast on numerous stations once a week and growing. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, please do me a big favor. Tell a friend. I'll be back in just a couple days with a brand new episode of the Law Enforcement Today radio show and podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.